So this is our third meeting. We've been pretty busy. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the welcome, and then we'll just quickly do introductions. I'll just call your name. You can introduce yourself. I am the chair of the Fair Elections Commission, and my name is Miss Jana Parker. And I will go through the commissioners first, and then I will go to staff, and then we will end on Miss Bynum, who will begin our first presentation. So I will start with my wonderful vice chair, Suchitra.
Good evening. It's good morning here. I'm Suchitra Balachandran, College Park, District 3, and I'm the vice chair of the commission. Good to see everyone.
And if we can go to Dan.
Hi, Dan Smith. I live in Cheverly.
Okay. Then Mrs. Williams.
Hello, I'm Diane Williams, and I'm happy to be here.
Is Miss Nelson updated as a panelist yet?
She was already in there as a panelist. Is it possible, Miss Nelson, that you're using a different email address? If so, if you can send me an email, or you can type it in the chat, whatever is easier for you, because you're in there as a permanent panelist using the information I have for you.
While that's going on, until she's put on, Miss Keisha Nelson is another one of our members, as well as Monica Jackson, who will not be joining us tonight. We're going to go ahead and introduce Miss Terry.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Terry Bell, and I'm with the Office of Law.
Thank you, Miss Bell. And then Miss Warner-Wiggins.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Warner-Wiggins, Special Assistant to the Director in the Office of Finance.
We also have on the call Mr. Peter Obalade. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes. Good evening. My name is Peter Obalade. I'm the budget management analyst responsible assigned to the Board of Elections.
Okay, thank you so very much. We're gonna go ahead and start with Miss Bynum. If you could introduce yourself and go ahead with the presentation, and then Mr. Obalade, I think we're gonna have some questions for you after Miss Bynum. So we'll just kind of wrap that up in her presentation in regards to that particular point, and then we'll go from there. Okay?
No problem.
Okay, thank you. Miss Bynum?
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And then I'm Kanika Bynum. I'm disabled, Jacqueline. I guess because I'm a participant. But I'm Kanika Bynum. I'm the budget analyst for the Office of Finance. I know you said you had some questions. Peter and I work together. We're both in the Office of Management and Budget. And I'm actually the one putting together the Fair Election Fund. So, but either of us can field questions. Let's see if I can share. Not yet. Really, I can kind of talk through. I only have 2 slides, really. We just wanted to provide a timeline for the Fair Election Commission for the budget process that's happening right now for fiscal year 25. Jacqueline, do you think I'll be able to share, or should I just kind of move on with it? Sorry, you're muted, so I can't hear you.
I made you a co-host, so I don't know if that will do it. Let's try that.
It's working now.
Okay.
Thank you. So just to share with everybody the timeline for the budget process. Right now in December, we're going through internal recommendations. So OMB is putting together the budget process. Starting next month, we'll meet with agencies to come to negotiations around their budget. In February, that process will go up to the CAO's office and the county exec's office. In March, the county exec will present her proposed budget, and in April, it'll go before the council. And by June, the council will approve the budget for fiscal year 2025. So every month, we're kind of in a different stage. And right now, we're kind of just starting for fiscal year 25, getting things together, coming up with agency requests, and then doing our own analysis and trying to propose a budget for the county exec beginning in March. And then as far as the Fair Election Fund, this is new. So we're all trying to wrap our heads around what this might look like. Three things that we're largely looking at. First, in terms of timing, right now we're putting together fiscal year 25's budget, and disbursements for the Fair Election Fund won't begin until fiscal year 26. So we do kind of have some time here. We are taking information from Montgomery and Howard County. So of course there are differences there, so we need to kind of just keep that in mind. We're closer to Montgomery County in terms of population, and but of course their council looks a little differently. So I believe they have more at-large members. And then the county council also, their budget and policy team also put out some fiscal analysis in regards to how much they approximate we might spend. It was a pretty large range. I think someone just sent out that analysis a couple of days ago. So there's just no way for us to know right now what the number will be, but those are the three inputs that we're using right now. And we'll just have to go through the budget process to see what the number will be. The number that we come up with in fiscal year 25 isn't necessarily the ultimate number when it comes to the first election, because like I said, disbursements won't begin until fiscal year 26. And right now we're working on 25. So, you know, whatever number ends up being proposed in fiscal year 25, that's not necessarily the ultimate budget for the Fair Election Fund for the 2026 election cycle. If you guys have any questions, feel free.
I have a question. Right, so I wanted to find out why, I mean, when can candidates file for running as publicly financed? Because you're saying disbursements don't begin till the following fiscal year. But I thought, and maybe I'm wrong, I thought that in the bill, it says, I mean, when do we set it up? Because this is the first cycle, but in the bill, it basically says, I think, the open period begins as soon as the next count. I mean, for the next cycle, it'll begin as soon as the council 4-year cycle begins. So there's nothing actually preventing someone from filing as a candidate for publicly financed race, except that we haven't set the program up yet. Is that correct?
So I can jump in on that. Yes, someone can indicate that they can actually indicate that they would like to be a candidate and start that process. In terms of the program being set up, what we don't have in place is a formal process for indicating the notice of intent to participate in the program. And so I would say if we come across a candidate that now has begun the process and has begun the process of joining the race and would like to participate in the program, I would suggest that we can come up with a system for making note that individual intends to participate in this program, and can start the process of collecting the necessary donations required to become eligible to begin receiving disbursements. But the way the legislation is set up, disbursements do not occur until FY 2026. The earliest that anyone would be able to get a payment would be essentially July 1st, 2025, which is the very beginning of fiscal year 26.
Right. So if I could just follow up on that, there is a criterion in the revised bill, which was CB 76 that just got passed, which requires that if you do intend to file as a publicly financed candidate, there are some restrictions on how much you can actually, if you have an existing campaign account, there's a restriction on how much you can gather into that and how much you can spend from that. And that is for the entire 4-year cycle of this election cycle. So a candidate who is contemplating running publicly financed needs to now, according to the bill, I mean, or it would be fair to say to that candidate that they have some confidence that this program is going to be funded adequately for them to make the decision that they're going to run publicly financed and not gather funds from other sources because they don't know whether this program is going to be funded adequately or not. So that onus is then on us because of the way the bill is now written, that candidates who may choose to run publicly financed should have that assurance that there will be money in the budget.
And I think we talked about that, Ms. Warner-Wiggins, in the email chain in regards to, I guess, the commission drafting a letter and then submitting it for legal review in regards to going out once we all approve it by the next meeting to the candidates that already are in the system, as well as maybe like a public letter to candidates who have the intent to file. If I'm following and tracking you correctly, Satitra.
Yes, so I mean, the point I wanted to make is while the fiscal year 26 budget would cover disbursements, if that's when the money is put in, there is still the question now of, given there's only $400,000 in the fund right now, there's still the question of candidates having some assurance that they will be adequately funded if they choose to run publicly financed, and that should happen in this budget cycle. That's sort of my thinking about this, and I welcome comments from other members of the panel.
I agree with that. I know Dan had a question. I agree with that, and I'm going to move it on to Dan because at the end of the day, we wouldn't want someone to put the notice of intent to file and to go through all the process, and then this is not funded properly. And then subsequently that harmed their chances in the cycle. Dan?
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. One is typically the county executive has had listening sessions about the budget. Will that occur this cycle? And if so, do we know when that's likely to occur, and will they just be virtual or in person?
That will occur this cycle. They typically happen, I believe it's like early March or early April or late March. Of course, the last couple of years they have been virtual. I'm not sure if it'll be virtual or in person this year.
Okay.
So I can't say for now, but I'm sure some sort of notice will go out sometime in February or March.
Okay, my understanding, my remembrance was that they actually were held earlier in that, so that they actually were done at a time. So they're listening for input from residents prior to the formal presentation, so that some of those comments could potentially affect the bottom line, or the line items that were in there. That's what I remembered. But
no, I think you're actually right about that. Exactly when it happens, I don't remember, but it would be before the March 15th presentation. So, the county executive will present a budget again, this would be for fiscal year 25, which would be before the disbursements would begin for the Fair Election Fund. And then any public comment about that fund in particular would be taken at that time. And that can be taken into account.
Okay, that'd be helpful to know when that occurs, because I think there's many people that are interested in this process that would potentially want to weigh in and have their voice heard at that. The other question I had was, so it sounds like, so we've got the county council, their budget and policy review, which we got that document. So how does the finance office look at this, and will we be getting like input because my understanding is we're charged with making a recommendation for the budget. So will we be getting a similar document or something from the finance office, or do we have all we're probably going to get right now? And
I can speak on that. The Office of Finance generally does not, we're not involved in formulating the budget. And so we can help you find or connect you with resources to make your recommendation. But our office generally, so there's the Office of Management and Budget that actually formulates the budget. Office of Finance is not directly involved in that process.
Okay, so I guess so we'll make a recommendation, and then if there is is there any other evaluation of that, or it will go into the county executive's budget in some form, but I guess I'm assuming it's just there's not transparency, or there's not, we make a recommendation, then it's like we likely won't get any response, and then we just have to wait until the budget comes out to see what's made. So my question, I guess, is there any other opportunity for dialogue between our commission and OMB, or the people that actually will put the number into the budget that will come out publicly?
I can ask about that. Typically, I'm not sure what the interaction would be like between the Office of Management and Budget and this commission. Typically, we don't release budget proposal numbers until the March 15th date. But I can understand where this commission, I can understand where it might be different or it might not. I'm not sure. Other commissions that I've worked with, they would hear it on March 15th as well. Although, of course, your input is needed. I can ask and try to get back. But I would expect, given other commissions, I would expect that you guys could make a recommendation based off of your own understandings or what analysis you might have, or from the county council's budget and policy team. And that would be something that we would receive and take into account.
Okay, and just a final follow-up would be, it would be helpful, I guess, to us, I think, if when that budget comes out, there's a justification or a rationale that comes along with that, so that because we're trying to make some assumptions about how many candidates there'll be, and whether a certain percentage of them will only use 60% of the funds or 40%. We got some helpful information on that from the document that's just given to us from the legislative office. And so we're trying to come up with these assumptions, and it would be great to engage if there's other review that looks at those assumptions. That would be really helpful, rather than just to come at the end and say, well, all we have left in the budget is X. So it'd be nice to know if it's coming based upon a review of actually how the program is likely to work, or whether it's coming just because it's a tough election year and this is all we've got. And so that's, I guess, the what I'm asking for would be, hopefully we could have a discussion about the assumptions that go into it, so that and then I appreciate you saying how, well, there's still another budget year, but we just have two. We have 25 and 26.
Right. We don't put together the budget based off of whatever money's left over can go here. So it won't be a crumbs budget. We are looking at Montgomery County has great reports on their website with their historical usage. So we're taking in all of that information and trying to do the best that we can with it right now, but we've just kind of started. And once we have that rationale, I think that's something that perhaps at a meeting like this, we could, after the budget's been proposed, perhaps at a meeting like this, we could talk about more thoroughly. And again, yes, just really want to stress that the 25 number will be added to the 26 number for the 2026 election cycle. So it won't be a crumbs budget. We are thinking through this thoroughly. We're just starting to think about it. And so we don't have a lot of information right now.
I want to go to teacher. Dan, are you done with the questions?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I want to go to teachers, but I also wanted to highlight, like, in all transparency, in regards to legislation, we brought this up in the past 2 meetings, we're behind the 8 ball in regards to when the legislation was initially passed years ago versus fast forwarding to like now in relation to the proper amount of funding, notification, even with the commission itself, being the commissioners being picked and then us starting this process. So a lot of the urgency on our part is simply because we are a commission, we have been commissioned to do this, and not of any fault of any of the commissioners, not of the fault of anybody else. We want to do a thorough job, but we also want to understand we're against like really tight timelines. And we want to be mindful of that in kind of all our conversations. So if you hear a sense of urgency in relation to like getting the numbers, having these conversations, getting notification, it's because the legislation has timelines on it that we want to follow as well. So teacher, and then Mrs. Williams.
Thank you. Yes, I also wanted to follow up on what Jana Parker said. That is that in 2018, when this bill was originally passed, the comments from the council members was that the reason the program did not start in 2022 was to give the county time to get this money into the budget. And since nothing has been done, or very little has been done since then, it sort of becomes our responsibility to ensure that this program has adequate funding. And that's sort of why we are trying to wrap our heads around this. But there was an original fiscal impact done in 2018, and that was by the Office of Audits and Investigations. And this current analysis is done. Is that being done by the legislative, by the county council, Department of Legislative Affairs? Can you tell me the difference between the two? Because both of them, the minimal numbers that they have put in them is for 2 candidates for each seat. So do you have any reference for us for how that came about and how we should look at this, and the sources of the 2 different analyses, the updated one that just came out in the 2018 one?
I can say both of those units are units under the county council.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I think that's useful to me. Thanks.
Mrs. Williams.
Yes. Hi, I was just trying to decide, is there any criteria that the finance has that we should be looking at it from your standpoint to assist us in developing a substantial budget estimate?
When you say criteria, you mean just, I mean, I think the justification that was provided through the offices under the county council would be the type of analysis that would be used to make those kinds of recommendations.
Okay, so nothing additional from the budget office.
Unless you have some other assumptions that you think were not included in that analysis, which I'm sure the Office of Management and Budget would be happy to hear.
No, I was just trying to find out how perhaps you would be arriving at your estimate, and perhaps some of that information that you would have to make that determination that we need to look at when we propose our recommendation. That's what I meant by, was it any criteria that is available that's necessary that we need to review?
Kanika, do you want to jump in? Is there anything else any kind of other information you'd be using?
I mean, right now, what we're trying to get a sense of is, one, how many elections are we going to have in the 2026 election cycle? Because there's the possibility for a special election and then a primary, the general election. So how many elections are we going to have? We just don't know how many people are going to jump into the race, how many people are going to be running for which offices. So we're trying to, I think you saw a small portion of that from the PDF the county council's budget and policy team's PDF, where they tried to get a sense of like, if 6 people ran for an at-large seat and 3 people ran for district seats and 6 people ran for county exec. And then there's an estimation of, are they really going to expend all of the funds that they have access to? Those are all of the things that we're trying to take into account. And right now there's, of course we don't know, but we're just trying to do our best estimate. And so I don't know if that's, I don't know how much research you all are looking to do on your own. When the county council's team went into past elections, the numbers were truly all over the place. There was no sense of an average of how many people run for a district seat or an average of how many people run for county executive. So at least I think they looked at like the past 3 or 4 elections. It was hard to come to a generalization, but those are the kinds of numbers and scenarios that we're trying to budget out so that we can be prepared for 2026. I don't know, did I answer your question or was there something else? Right now, I don't have a sense of what other things outside of the information that, from Montgomery County's website or from the county council's analysis. Right now, we're still just in the formulating process. So I don't have a sense of what's missing other than truly just being able to tell the future.
Right. It sounds like you're like we are. We kind of don't really know. So I just thought when you all were making up your budget and your analysis, maybe you could share the criteria for things that you use that we could also piggyback on. But thank you so much.
So teacher, I know you had another question.
Yes, so a couple of things. One is what I feel that the 2 fiscal analyses that have been put forward so far have missed is that there are candidates who file for election who let you know upfront that they do not intend to spend more than $1,000, right? I forget the term that's used for them, but they file and they say we don't really intend to raise and use any more than $1,000. And that is included in the list, for instance, in the 10 candidates who ran for county executive. I think 8 of them said they weren't going to use more than $1,000, if I remember correctly. So I think to say 10 candidates will be running for county exec and simply take that number and say that will cost us, $750,000 times 10 is, I think, not very useful, right? I think it's more useful for us and for you to look at how many candidates actually raised money, sufficient. What is the average usage? I mean, the limit on how much a candidate gets was based in 2018 on how much candidates spent in these elections. And that's how the 750 and the 250 and the 75,000 for the various categories came about. So I think in that context, it might help to know how many candidates actually raised money and ran. So that would be one criterion. The second point I think that is made in this revised and updated fiscal impact is useful. And that is to look at what fraction from Montgomery County, what fraction of candidates who chose to run publicly financed. And I think that number was cited as around 30%. And of these 30%, how many actually succeeded in raising enough public contributions to make the maximum match cap, which was another 30% of those who filed, right? And so that brings the number down substantially and leaves us in a much better position to say, I mean, it's a different county, yes, but at least it gives us some idea of how many, given that we're starting with no knowledge of what will happen in Prince George's, at least it gives us some criteria of how to handle this. So in that sense, I think, I think that gives us a better idea to hone down the numbers. And the other piece was if there is insufficient money, the bill very clearly says that that the amount of funds distributed to the candidates will just be reduced proportionately to what the budget is. And I think as somebody working on this commission, the last thing we want is to invite people to run publicly financed with the intention, and that's the intention behind the law, that this will then allow which will improve the state of democracy, will get people more engaged. I mean, various reasons for why this program is in place. The last thing we want is to encourage people to run and tell them, I'm sorry, we don't have enough money for you to fund your election, right? That would be a terrible way to start. So I think we can both put some limits at the bottom end and put some limits on the top end from what we know practically. And that's why I think the 2 candidates per seat was, I think, the lower limit in both these analyses that was done. Let's assume there are 2 candidates for each district seat, 2 candidates for each of the at-large seats, 2 candidates for each of the executive seats, who will run publicly financed, who will achieve the maximum cap, and then what's the amount that comes about. And that amount in both these analyses is 3.65 million, right? And that's how the lower end of this, the amount that needs to be financed is done. So I wanted to put those thoughts forward on, because otherwise the range is huge. If we assume that everybody's going to run publicly financed, and then it takes us nowhere. So I think we can actually put some restraints on those. And I would like Kanika's comments on that. Thanks.
No, I mean, that's exactly what we're looking at. So I think you saw from when I've seen Montgomery counties, I don't think I saw maybe 1 or 2 people who reached the maximum. And then, of course, you spend a lot of money on the primary and then assumedly not very much in the general election. So the primary is kind of the real race where things can kind of get up, become more expensive on thinking about it from that perspective. But no, that's exactly what we're looking at in terms of which seats are open, how many people do we expect to run for that seat. Just looking at other counties, it doesn't look like the chance of kind of maxing out is very high. It seems that it's really more a matter of how many candidates do you get. And I think that 3.5 number, right, was the lower end of the estimates. And I think Montgomery County spent $5 million their first election, general and primary. So everything that you said is exactly what we're thinking about. It's just a 2 to 3 month process to put the budget together. And whether or not there's a special election, definitely will throw a wrench into the bunch. But everything that you said is exactly what we're thinking about. We just have to come up with a number from there and then decide how do we want to fund it over the 2 fiscal years that we have.
I know Dan had,
yeah,
go ahead, teacher.
Just to follow up, when you talk about the special election, this program doesn't come into effect until the 2026 primary and general election. So it doesn't actually kick in if there's a special election before that. That's my understanding. So I don't think we need to worry about, if there is a special election, there won't be public financing for the special election. So I think that's, so that was the comment that I had. And there was something else which I seem to have forgotten, but when it comes back, I will raise my hand again. Thanks.
Okay, that was helpful.
But I mean, my question was about the very same thing. And that is, and I think maybe we park this and need to come back to it, but would be, in what instances could it be that the fund could be used for a special election? First of all, it'd have to be set up there, but I'm just, since you raised it, I think something we should look at going forward to see if it's some way it could be worked, because I could envision that if somebody has already set up a fund and is running for an office, and maybe could they switch offices if there's a special election that comes up and they, and they want to, or they're eligible to run in a special election. They already have a fair election fund account set up. Could they run that? So I don't think we need to get into that speculation right now, but if anybody has any obvious insights, but otherwise I think we should at least visit whether it works, because that obviously would affect the funding. And
Yeah.
someone would have to get funding, like instantly, because often aren't they set up with just a month notice or something? Very little notice often.
Yeah, the special election is a month of, I'm gonna get to teacher, and then I have a question as well. So go ahead, teacher.
Yeah, I don't think you're allowed to suddenly switch. I mean, I think when you file, you're filing your special election, your election your public financed election fund for a particular race. And I don't think you can switch monies if you're going to run for another race. That's at least, I think you'd have to park this money or return this money, or, and then start again with a fresh account. But anyway, I don't think that affects us in the 2026 cycle in this budget process. But the point I wanted to make was about Montgomery County. So first of all, I think if there is extra money in the budget and people don't run, say this program is, people run for district seat, but nobody runs for executive, and there's extra money left in the budget, then that money simply goes back. Either the council can choose to keep it in the Fair Elections Fund for the next cycle, or can choose to return it to the general budget and then reallocate for the next cycle, right? So nothing is actually spent in the sense until the candidates raise enough money to make to be eligible for the public match. I also wanted to say that in Montgomery County, the current executive for 2 terms, the current executive has been a publicly financed candidate, right? And so, but that person came with many, many years of council, having been on the council, including in an at-large seat. So with a lot of visibility countywide. And we can also look at our county and say, we can't actually say who's going to run and what their previous experience is. We have no way of guessing that. But I'm just saying that in that context, even given that the amount of money that they spent was far less than what they budgeted. But I think, as you said, they budgeted 9 million and spent 3. The one other point I wanted to make is it would be terrible if 2 candidates ran publicly financed, and then we said, I'm sorry, we only have money for one of you, or you have to split the money between the 2 of you. And that, again, just to reiterate that point, would not be a great way to start the program. So that's really all I wanted to say. Thanks, Jeannie.
I kind of wanted to, I guess, highlight what I'm hearing and just get a good response. It sounds like that number of the 3.5 million is something that Ms. Bynum, you have kind of noticed, you've thought about. It's something that you guys are aware of in regards to the lowest number that we could ask for in taking into account the possibilities for our particular county. And so I guess my question is that kind of along the lines of what Ms. Williams was asking, like, is that a viable number for us to start our request on? And I do take into account what you said about the funding over the course of 2 years, but I'm just saying in relation to that number altogether, is that a number that you could say is a good start for us, or even a baseline?
I'm definitely not here to give a recommendation to the commission, but I think based on the analysis that you've received from the county counsel's office, that seems to be the minimum floor of their analysis. So I think it's a reasonable place to start based on that. I think based on what the other counties that we've looked at, that would be a reasonable place to start. I'm not here to make a recommendation to the commission as to what your number should be, but just looking at the little bit of data that we do have, I think that would be a very reasonable place to start. And, there's no harm in, I think the commission should ask for what they want to ask for. based on whatever, reasonableness you guys have, I don't think there's I don't want to say that no one's afraid of you overreaching it. It sounds like you guys are really trying to be reasonable. And I think that you have the bandwidth. This is brand new. I think no one wants it to be a failure the first election cycle. I think you have the room to ask for what you think is reasonable.
Okay, thank you. So teacher?
Yeah, just one other point. No, I think that's very useful comment for us to have. But the one point I wanted to make is that in Montgomery County, there are two tranches. I can ask for money in the primary and you can ask for money in the general. So you can ask for money twice. Whereas in Prince George's, whatever money you get, the limit, which is say 75,000 for a district seat, is what you get to run both your primary and general elections. So I think we should keep that in mind as well. And I think the reason for that is really because the primary determines the winner for the most part in Prince George's, because the vast majority of voters are Democrats, and the Democratic primary is what matters in Prince George's. The numbers are somewhat different in Montgomery County. So I just wanted to also keep that in mind in terms of our budget versus Montgomery County's budget.
I think those are all good points. I know we're going to move into a discussion around the Fair Election Fund of budget appropriation recommendation. This is kind of leading into that. I wanted to give space if anyone had any more questions for Ms. Bynum, to have that moment now, and then move to also if anyone had any direct questions for Mr. Obalade. I know, Ms. Bynum, you said that you guys work together closely and you could field all the questions, but I also, want to be honorable and respectful to the time that he's on here as well. And if anyone wanted to ask him anything directly, I wanted to give them that opportunity as well, just with all transparency. So does anyone have any final questions for Ms. Bynum or any questions for Mr. Obadale? Okay. All right. With that, Ms. Bynum, thank you for your participation tonight. Thank you for your attendance. We really appreciate you. Mr. Obalade, just trying to pronounce your name correctly. Thank you for coming as well. Did you have any closing remarks, either of you?
I don't really have anything to say. Thank you for having us. We're trying to, it's a fun new thing, so we're trying to figure it out, and hopefully we come up with the right number.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on what Kanika said, again, thank you for inviting us here, at least to be part of the discussion. I know I've been quiet, but I'm honestly just listening and learning as well, because whatever information here, I would like to take that for future, edification. And the only thing I do want to mention is similar to what Kanika has already mentioned, is that there's a lot of uncertainty and there are a lot of variables going on. Even for the next, for what they call the elections next year, there's a lot of ifs and buts. So it's very hard, or it's a bit difficult to budget for ifs and buts, but we are really doing our best in this office to ensure that we get the right number. So that's the only statement I can make.
Okay. I wanted to acknowledge there was so thank you. I wanted to acknowledge that there was a question in the chat that said, if a special election is held after 2026, how would the system work? Mr. Robertson, I think that's something that we will be discussing to figure out. This particular portion is about having enough funding in the pot for the first election cycle of 2026. So we're going to focus on that first, and then work to think about the next portion, because that's kind of our charge right now. So yes, thank you, Mr. Obalade, as well. Okay. At this time, we can go ahead and transition into the Fair Elections Fund appropriation recommendation discussion. So we just had a really nice conversation about the money that that we should or we could, or the baseline for what we could ask for. I think that we should take into account what she said about 3.5 million being reasonable and a good start. And in addition to the fact that we already have 400,000 in there, but also take into account that she said that there would be another bump in the next budget cycle as well. So taking in context to that, I have a suggestion. It's a suggestion. We can all open dialogue about it. Starting off our funding request for this budget cycle for 2 million. And the reason why I'm saying that, I'm going to also add this context in there. It would put us at 2.4 million, right? Which would mean the next election cycle, they would only have to fund it at about, well, not only, but they could be working off the number of the 3.5, and then it'll just be another 1.5 million. But also, so teacher, I see, I'm going to go to you as well. Also, there's a thought process of, we've been hearing whispers, and it's not our job to figure out where the money comes from. But it is to take into account, we've been hearing whispers about the finances for Prince George's County. And so just having that in the back of my mind as well is kind of where I thought about with this number. But so teacher, what are your thoughts? Ms. Williams, Ms. Nelson, Dan, and just for transparency, because I know this is a recorded and it's being online, I'm not calling the teacher and Dan by their first names out of a point of disrespect. I have a personal relationship with them, and I'm just honoring Mrs. Williams and Ms. Nelson as well. Go ahead, teacher.
Yeah, I just want to make one small correction. It's 3.65 million for funding 2 seats. So let's just, I just wanted to, I know you ballparked it as 3.5, but it's 3.65 to fund 2 seats.
That's fair. We need to be as accurate as possible.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's all the point I wanted to make right now.
Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts? So let's move forward with this part of the discussion. What are your thoughts about the suggestion about 2 million?
I think it's a reasonable start, the 2 million in 2025 budget.
Okay. Ms. Nelson, I see you came off mute.
Yeah, I was okay with 3.5, so.
Listen, I was okay with 3.62, but I mean, with everything swirling and with the other context of, hey, we have another budget cycle in 2026 to give the rest of the funding for the initial thought process. And I'll address my thoughts also in regards to how to request that. Dan, did you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, yes, thank you. So I looked at the numbers quite a bit from the updated analysis, and then just was reflecting. So just to put it in perspective, if we would have funded the 3.65 equally over, there would actually could have been 7 budget cycles since this legislation originally passed, and that would have put it at 525,000 per year over that whole period, which it's important, I guess, going forward. Once we can hit a stable first election, once we make that heavy lift and get there, the annual funding each year, we need to come back and revisit, but it will come down, and it would look like it would be under $1 million, I would think. But for now, we need to make that catch up. And I think that the 3.65 million, which would then be with the 400,000 would be 3.25. And if we did, I think it's important to have a strong statement now, both we're catching up, but also just to affirm to the community and to the candidates that this is an important program, and you can have confidence that we'll get there. So that's why I would think that it would be helpful to the overall, I think confidence in the program, if the number coming out would be more than 50%, the money going in this next cycle. And so that's why I would support that. And then just one final thing is that, I did, and this is something that I think we can look at deeper, or that the probably the Office of Finance will be looking at, is if one takes a real deep dive into the Montgomery County numbers, which again is hard to compare these, but even if one looks at how Suchitra presented it earlier, let's say roughly a third of the candidates use public funding, but only a third of those actually use the full amount. One does a percentage of that. I actually came up with a percentage for each of the races and worked through in my old sort of high school math method, and it came out pretty close. I mean, it was like slightly less than the 3.65, but not dramatically different. So it was, down in the lower 3 millions, using that, trying to see if those numbers could come up with anything dramatically different. In my first look at it, which actually, I spent a couple of hours, I couldn't find anything that would change the magnitude of that overall. I think the only magnitude that's going to be is if there is the number of candidates running for the county executive, and that we just can't predict, I think. And so including 2 is, I think, a responsible way to proceed. And if there were less, the number could come down. I mean, that's where the big hit comes from in overall. But because I found not not a factor of 10 or, a magnitude much different, I'm confident in going forward with the 3.65 overall number. And I appreciate that the Office of Finance is going to be looking at it as well, and that they're going to be trying to come up with their own assumptions, and that we will see if so anyway, I'm confident in going forward with that and asking for 2 million this year.
Asking for 2 million this year, but then overall for the 2. So are you confident? I think we might be saying the same thing different ways. Are you saying that you're confident with asking for an additional 3.25 over the span of 2 years, with the first influx of money being 2 million this budget cycle? Or are you saying that you want the additional 3.25 all in this election cycle?
No, I think
I'm sorry, in this year.
Yeah, no, I think 2 million in this coming budget is appropriate. And then, we'll revisit it again. But I think our expectation or assumption or default will be that the next budget cycle will be 1.25 million, and we'll be open to any further discussion.
And I'm going to go to Satitra, but that's kind of what I was thinking. I was thinking in framing our request, we frame it from the perspective that over the next 2 years, this is how we see this program funded at a minimum of 3.65, with 3.25 put into this budget cycle, and it put into the fund over the next 2 budget cycles, with 2 million being the first iteration. That is kind of how I thought of it in my head. Of course, you guys aren't in my head, so kind of explaining that out now. Go ahead, Satitra.
If anyone else has anything else to add before I jump in, that would be fine as well. Otherwise, I mean, I was glad to see the Department of Finance also sort of wrapping their heads around the 2-person per race being kind of the minimum that we could do, or, acknowledging that that was a reasonable way of looking at it. So, I mean, maybe we could frame our letter by saying this is the budget we want. And, perhaps even making a recommendation the full amount be done in this cycle so as to inspire confidence in candidates that who want to opt in to say that they would be money in the budget if they decided to go. I mean, it's a really very, safe way for us to budget this, because if it doesn't get used, it goes back to the public coffers, right? We're not spending anything unless candidates come up and actually run publicly financed, qualify, and then start asking for the match. So, perhaps to inspire confidence, we just want all of the monies in this budget. And, and then looking at the entire budget, which is $5 billion or thereabouts, which with half of it going to the schools, the folks that make these decisions could determine, but we would say no less than 2 million in this cycle. Because this is the point at which candidates will decide whether they're going to run or not. So we want to make it substantial in the first year, but no reason, given the small dollar amount that it is relative to the entire budget, that everything couldn't be funded right now. So that was the sort of the thought I had, put it forward in that fashion.
So you're saying, and I'm gonna say it in the way that we would probably need to phrase it to give context to everybody in their thoughts and feedback. So what you're saying is you want to give them options in regards to getting to this the additional 3.25, to say, hey, we'd really like for you to fully fund it at 3.25 this budget county cycle. However, if not, then we still feel like the 3.25 number could happen at 2 million this budget cycle, and then an additional 1.25 at the next budget cycle. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, something along those lines, because it seems like there is some consensus that they should be, I mean, even from the folks who analyze budgets, that 2 per seat is not a bad way of looking at it as the minimum, and that's what we are recommending. Yeah, so that's it. I would say yes.
Okay, I like that idea in regards to giving. So first off, I like the idea in regards to giving them options, because this is I'll leave it at that. I don't want to give too much of my own thoughts outside of the fact that I like the idea of giving them options with still the number requested that we would want to have, and that would be like the language we would utilize.
I'm just a little bit confused when we say give them options. I thought we said that we would recommend the 3.65, and for this cycle, we would ask for 2 million because they already have 400 available. Is that right?
Yes, that's what we initially were discussing. Satitra was saying to give a different perspective in relation to asking for the 3.25 to be fully funded this budget cycle, but then also saying if that is not a viable option, then the 2 million this election cycle with the 1.25 the next, I'm sorry, I keep saying election cycle, with the 1.25 for the next budget cycle. That is what Satitra is offering. So essentially, when I say options, it's like, hey, you can put all the money in the pot now. We greatly appreciate that. Let's do that, right? Or if that's not viable for you, then the minimum you should put in this budget cycle has to be 2 million in regards to the confidence of the Fair Election Fund and drawing people to be able to do that, with the remaining balance of the 1.25 coming in the next budget cycle.
Because there's so much uncertainty about it, I think one would question putting it all up front. Because, we don't know, they don't know. Long as we know that we want it to be 3.65 for the total and to only allocate 2 million now, I think that's a good recommendation. But I'm flexible.
We would still offer that as a recommendation. We would just say at the top point that if you could put in the whole 3.25 now, that would be like, hey, do that. And also,
it doesn't sound realistic.
That right.
To me,
Well, I don't know, Mrs. Diane. The budget people got on there and said it was a fair request. So I don't know. It might be realistic, but I do think it could be realistic from the budget people standpoint, and then we're all like gung-ho about it. And then we're also taking into account, you know, the other factors. The county council has what they would want for a budget. The county executive has what she would want for a budget. And all those things come into factor in regards to what we're requesting. I know that it seems as if we're all, you know, staunch on, look, 3.65 is the program amount that we want. And it's the very minimum for Prince George's County. So we're all agreed on that. I think the part that we're trying to, you know, figure out and how to give it to them is just kind of like, hey, you can fund it fully up front, or you can break it up into these two portions. But we know that the 1.25 can't be the first, that can't be the first deposit. It has to be the 2 million for the first deposit. It has to be that in my estimation. There's a question in the chat. Let me get to that. If there's a competition for funds and you can defend a higher figure, wouldn't asking for more make it more likely to get 2 million if that is what you would settle for? John, I hope I'm answering your question as we're like talking now. I honestly, I don't necessarily want to get into negotiations with the county council about a program when we have a firm number, because then the county council or whoever, well, the county council could say, well, if we're negotiating, we can put in 500,000 this cycle because we don't know this and we don't know that. The number is based on what we've gotten back from the county councils, two different agencies under the county council, is that the 3.65 number is the lowest, that the bare minimum that we can go that would give the program a good running start or good jump. And our request for 2 million, the first budget cycle, is only from the perspective of also requesting that it's fully funded in the next budget cycle at the 1.25 million. I hope that answered your question, Mr. Robinson. Yeah. I think that's a good, yeah, that's a good number. I also wanted to quickly look at this letter that was drafted in relation to presenting the county with our recommendation. I'm gonna read it really quickly, but you guys should have got it in your email. And I'm gonna read it just from the context of if you guys feel like there's something that should be changed or taken out. I know this was kind of, you guys kind of got it at the 9th hour. So I write on behalf of the County's Fair Election Commission to present our recommendations for the amount of funds to include in the county's FY 2025 budget for the Fair Election Fund. The Fair Election Fund Commission was authorized to oversee the rollout and successful operation of the fund, which, beginning with the 2026 election cycle, will provide matching funds for candidates for county council or county executive who opt into the county program established in CB 099-2018 and amended with CB 076-2023. Providing annual funding recommendations is the primary responsibility of the commission. Adequate funding is essential to the success of this program. The 2018 Policy and Fiscal Impact Statement for this legislation provided 3 budget scenarios for the fund. An updated fiscal impact estimation for the county's Budget and Policy Analyst Division, provided November 29th, 2023, reviewed and updated the analysis. Both of these assessments consider 3 estimates for the amount needed in the fund, depending on the number of candidates qualifying for the full matching funds. The smallest estimate is 3.65 million, would provide full matching funds to at least 2 qualifying candidates for each office. Following a review of these reports of matching funds in Montgomery County and Howard County, we recommend the 3.65 million fund for the 2026 election cycle. Now I'm gonna pause right here, as we brought up, as Ms. Williams brought up, as Satitra brought up. That would be the initial question. We'd add something in there to say, if this fund could not be fully funded at 3.65 million, well, we would change the 3.65 million to Oh yeah, I'm sorry. There's more, but we would just ask at a certain point, we would input the language of what we just talked about 2 million being for the 2025 election budget cycle, and then 1.25 million for the 2026 budget cycle. We'd add that language in there. I just want to put that caveat before I continue. So I know we just discussed it, and then I'm reading a letter that doesn't have it. But we just discussed it. So to date, just 400,000 has been committed for the fund, necessitating the appropriation of the total 3.25 million in two budgets to meet the important goal. The original legislation called for the fund to operate in the 2022 election cycle, but was amended to begin in 2026 elections to allow more time to the fund to fund the program. Had that occurred, the fund could have been reached with this level with an annual appropriations of less than 525,000 per year. In order to ensure the success of the program intended to empower the voices of average voters, we urge the county to strongly affirm its commitment to alternately funding elections by including 2.2 million in the FY 2025 budget for the fair election. And this would give candidates and voters confidence to the program and its viability. Let's not risk falling short of the community's commitment to fair and equitable elections at a time when the confidence in government has been eroded across the country. The commission and I welcome questions and dialogue around this and other fair election matters. Thank you for your consideration. I would put the caveat that this needs a little bit more edits in regards to, yes, we did put in there the 2 million for the 2025, but I also want to make sure that we're clearly articulating that they can put in 3.25 for this budget cycle, but the minimum requirement would be the 2, as well as clearly spelling out to them, and then 1.25 needs to come in 2026. Those would be my amendments to the letter. Does anyone have any additional feedback? Okay.
Yeah, I
go
just
ahead.
wanted
Sorry,
to
Stacey.
add, I mean, the only thing is that this is the minimum, right? That all the analyses have indicated so far. I think we should make that clear in the letter, that we are, that because this is the minimum, we still await further analysis, perhaps more detailed look at how one would view this. We don't expect it to get any higher and any lower than this. Right, and 2 separate analyses have shown this. So is there some reason to emphasize that in our letter?
In all transparency, I don't want to leave anything to chance with people's own understanding. I'm one to spell it out as quick. I'm one to spell out everything so that there is no confusion. I wouldn't want for someone to come back and to say, oh, they asked for 2 million, we gave them 2 million. And then in the 2026 portion, oh, that wasn't my understanding from your letter. No, we asked for 2 million in 2025, and then we're asking for the remainder of the balance in 1.25 in 2026. I don't think it could hurt to emphasize that this is the schedule that we're expecting this money to be put into this fund. So in emphasizing from that perspective, if I'm answering your question correctly.
Yeah, that's fine.
So that's definitely something I would want to do, because a lot of people don't understand until you make it plain. So go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I think the one point that did not make it in that maybe we should add would be just a brief clause or sentence about the unspent funds, will remain in the fund, or for future will be there for future funds, reducing the amount needed in the future by that much, or that would be available for the council to reprogram them at
Agreed.
at their desired. Something just making that point, and not that some of these points are that necessarily important for specifically the county executive or the head of the county council, but that this letter also is kind of an education vehicle for a lot of people, so including the council members or whoever reads it. it's helpful to have, as you said, spell out some of the detail that in future years we might not have even need as long a letter, because we'll have a website, we'll have all this stuff that's really easy to access back up. So just adding a little bit of those points may be helpful in this first time.
Agreed. Agreed. It's been my experience that the more information given in a manner that someone can digest lessens the confusion later on. Lessens the, oh, what? I didn't know, and what? Oh, and blah, blah, blah. It also lessens the questions for us when we have to go in front of them, and not to say that we don't welcome questions, ask away. It's just from the perspective of, well, yeah, in the letter that we sent you, if we don't have two people running publicly finance for each position, then that money stays in the pot and it's a less number two fund. So you might not even have to, no one may run in 2026. It's just kind of putting that in perspective. But yeah, I'm always a fan of giving as much information as possible in the most digestible way, so that by the time you ask me questions, it's kind of like, cool. I've already addressed that. So teacher, I see you came off mute. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
No, I was just trying to figure out what percentage this was in terms of the full budget, because I know it looks like a lot of money when we look at it, but the full budget is also very large. And I know there's the school's budget and then the other discretionary funding and so on. So it might be worth sort of putting something, or at least for ourselves, maybe not in the letter, but for ourselves, to understand what percentages, because it's a very tiny percentage. I remember, I don't want to quote numbers now until I've sort of done the math, but it's a very small fraction of the entire budget that we're talking about, right? So everything is a small fraction, but many things are important in the county. So we're always trying to figure that piece out. So that was it. I didn't have anything firm to add to everything you said.
Mrs. Williams, I see you've came off mute.
Well, I'm getting ready to sign off, so I just wanted to sure, did you need a vote or anything? But I also wanted to thank the Director of Budget and Policy Analysis for sending that updated requested information. It certainly was very helpful for us to give some type of guidance. I really appreciate you all doing that. Thank you. Madam Chair, do we need to vote, or do I need to?
With the last point, I think we might need to vote. So let's move to that very, very quickly. This is the notice of intent for deadline discussion. Ms. Warner-Wiggins had brought this up in our last kind of conversation around when do we want to set a deadline for the notice of intent to be in the public funding, the public financing. The recommendation from the state board is the date to be set at the deadline for filing candidacy at 9 p.m. on the last Tuesday in the February before the primary election. Is there any thoughts to moving away from the recommendation of the state board? And if so, for what reason? Outside of that, I would kind of lean to staying with that. What is everyone's thoughts?
I think it's how they operate the program in all the other counties, right? So I think we should stick with it, since they are the ones who are doing the gathering of receipts and then giving the information to finance and how much to cut the checks for and so on. So I think the job of running the program is split between the State Board of Elections and the Department of Finance. Did I get that right, Ms. Warner-Wiggins?
I wouldn't go so far as to say it's split. The state board, of course, is the keeper of MD Chris, which is the site where candidates would upload their information. But all of the policy development and even the determination, or at least the confirmation of the amounts of the matching dollars would all be handled by the Office of Finance. So much of the, I guess I'm hesitant to say split because most of the
Okay.
is done by the Office of Finance.
Could you repeat that date?
Yeah, it would be the same deadline for the state, which is 9 p.m. on the last Tuesday in February before the primary election. Do you have that date in front of you, Ms. Warner-Wiggins?
I sure do. Let's see.
That
It
exact
would
date.
be for 2026, February 24th, 2026.
February 24th, 2026. So that is what we are voting on right now in relation to that being the deadline to announce your intent for public financing. And to the point that was made in earlier discussions, I feel like they'll know pretty quickly since we have to send out a letter in like, the next month or so. And the January meeting will be vote heavy because we're going to be voting on at least 2 letters. And we'll get those to you before the January meeting. But that being stated, that number again, that date again was February, you said February 24th, 2026. Okay, so I'm gonna put forth I move that we go ahead and set the deadline for the announcement of, or for the filing of the intent to use public financing to align with the state recommendation of February 24th, 2026. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, vote aye.
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 Okay, the ayes have it, and look at us. Boom. Doing it, guys.
So just a quick question about the recommendation letter. Does that, I mean, this is I guess to Jacqueline, do we wait for the next month to pass that, or is that, since we've discussed it, can we approve that now? Or do we have to have the exact language? What's the protocol?
You mean the recommendation for the appropriation?
Yes.
I think because it's kind of an administrative matter and the decision has been made in terms of the general contents of the letter, we can probably, and there's already been a draft put forward, we can probably finalize the draft via email, because the essentially the decision has been made of what's going to be inside in the letter. So I think we can by email share the letter and share our draft, any edits, and move from there.
Okay, thanks.
If that's the case, then is this appropriate to entertain a motion that I could move that we accept the 3.65 million with the recommendations as we have discussed about the remaining 3.25 million, and that the so we would agree to that, and then I think it would be appropriate if the you can add language, clarify the draft we have, circulate that to the members, and then maybe give the members a deadline to respond if there's any other adjustments or feedback. And then you could finalize the letter and it could go out before the next meeting. It sounds like that would be appropriate. So
you want to put forth that motion, Dan?
Yeah, so moved.
Second it. All those in favor, vote aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Aye. Okay. So, yep. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our meeting for today. I'm just gonna wrap up, let everyone go. Guys, we're getting out of here at 7:22, 7:23. Thank you guys all for coming on. I'll check in with you guys over the next 2 weeks. I know that we have essentially a break, so I will let you guys have the holidays and whatnot. But if I send you just like a hey, definitely just checking on you. All right, bye.
I just want to say something, Madam President.
Yes,
Thank you for drafting that letter. Thank you very
Oh.
much. It was quick and a turnaround, but thank you.
Oh, no worries. And thank the Honorable Commissioner Dan.
Honorable Dan, Commissioner
Yeah,
Dan.
the Honorable Dan.
Honorable Dan, you did an excellent job.
Thank you, but also I want to thank you for raising last time the
Mhm.
value and the importance of asking for an updated analysis.
Mhm.
That was turned out to be very helpful there, and I want to acknowledge the staff for the additional information that they put in there so rapidly and thoughtfully.
Mhm.
Thank you. Have a happy holiday.
Yeah.
Happy holiday, everyone. Bye.